Hey everyone, so excited as usual. I'm always excited, but this is a really special one. Dr. Chloe Johnson is joining us today, and we had a brief conversation yesterday about some of the things she'd be talking about. And uh, I mean, we could have talked forever. There's a lot there. We'll probably have to have her back for sure. But the guidelines, as usual, of course, we never are mean to each other. We're all good at all of this. Uh, Taking turns. If you write something in the chat and you want it read out loud, please write read before it, and Roger or I or Chloe will be able to read that out loud. Chloe's going to talk for a while, and so if you can hold your questions until the end, we'll have a discussion then. And use the hand raising icon or just wave in the screen and we'll be sure to call on you. And I think that's about it. So Chloe, take it away.
Wow. So I'm going to be reading a lot, so you will not so much see my eyes here, you will see my eyes there. And for the purposes of this conversation, ND is neurodiversity. So thank you for allowing me to talk to you today about the intersectional distress of belonging as an older Black female student with ND. I will talk to you in 4 parts today, one being born in silent segregation with ND, two, moving into childhood as a self-diagnosed failure and springboarding off of motherhood and community organizing as a way of finding my secret intelligence. Three, using the advent of technology combined with lived experience to return to school. And four, revisiting failure and isolation in doctoral pursuit as an older Black female student. But first, here is my poem. I long for a place between the spaces where I do not belong, could never fit in, will only stand out. I long for a place to be, where I am not the wrong usage of a verb, but in proper use, right where I am. My desire to fit in, sit in, belong is matched only by my desire to detach, delink, decouple from the spaces that have never accepted me. I belonging, stay longing, am longing for a place to call home. And though I answered the call for others in short order, the call for me to come, to be long, never arrived. So in 1962, Martin Luther King, was arrested for protesting segregation in the American South. Women were a year away from legal mandates of equal pay, 10 years away from Title IX, and hyperkinetic impulse disorder or minimal brain dysfunction would have been a diagnosis for children with ADHD, especially Black children who were being stigmatized as troublemakers or intellectually deficient. In 1962, I was born in the American North, where silent segregation conspired to detach me from belongingness because of the personal struggles I had with attention, learning, and unseemly behaviors. Black girls like me were rarely seen through a lens of support. Instead, we were pathologized, treated with suspicion, discipline, or outright punishment. By racializing perceived disability and disabilitizing the social construct called race. As a Black girl, I was part of one of the least protected classes of my era in white society. However, I was also part of an unprotected class among my own Black people. My town that I grew up in was all Black. And I would say I grew up Black town bougie, but I was also a very dark skinned, nappy haired little girl with broad features, big nose, big lips. In similar ways, that race and indie, that the way that they antagonize each other competing for systemic and interpersonal isolation in dominant society, colorism complicated every layer of ND otherness for me. When Alice Walker wrote that colorism, like colonialism, sexism, and racism, impede us, she could have easily thrown ND into the mix. My mama would often say to me, "Girl, your mind ain't as long as your hair." And that was referring to my forgetfulness and also my short pickaninny hair. Or she would say, "Child, you move through the house like an elephant." That was a comment referencing my body awareness difficulties. She hadn't heard about the way that people like me would have felt disconnected from their body or maybe from physical space. I was a misfit in my family, in school, and certainly even without one ND, I was a misfit in white society. I simply did not belong anywhere. I was reading full-length novels at age 9, books like Black Like Me, Moby Dick, and Man-Child in the Promised Land at age 9, y'all. But I still could not tie my shoes or tell time. And really, I still thank God for digital clocks, right? So I was experiencing the distress of colorism, something that Landor and Smith refer to as skin tone wounds. I was experiencing the distress of racism, the distress of ableism and sexism all at once. We know now that traumatic stress over time untreated contributes to mental health symptoms, physical symptoms, and social isolation. What we didn't know then in 1962, in 1972, and beyond, and up until recently, that the work we were doing in civil rights would not be enough, that freedom marches and court cases could not alone dismantle the layered oppressions carried in our bodies. Healing will require not only policy change, but also personal, collective, and intergenerational recognition of trauma and the creation of spaces where all who we are can truly belong. Despite all the ways that my particular set of privileges, intelligences, and physical speed and strength should have included me, the intersections of ND, blackness, gender, and race denegotiated all of those currencies. I left high school and my town confused and without the social skills needed to pursue successfully higher learning. I went to college, but I could not find any of my classes. I mean, I really could not navigate that space on campus. Even after 2 months, I still could not find the classes. I could not keep up with my homework. I could do it. I mean, I really could do it, but I couldn't find it the next day when it was time to turn it in. And I couldn't keep up with the books that I was given or basic supplies. Now, I know all you youngins under 40 are thinking, why didn't you GP what? Or why didn't you set a remind? What? No. You just can't imagine how it was, what it was like to deal with ND, HDHD, MDD, any kind of D. It was all a nightmare back in the day. It was all, we just did not have some of the things that we have now. And I simply had no community to support me. I was too odd for the other Black students on campus. I was a religious nerd who played ultimate frisbee, and I was still Black. College was where I first heard myself referred to as the N word. It was the first place that a white boy told me that he couldn't date me because I was Black. And I was told by a professor, "You're so smart. You're like a real person." I had incomplete currencies of belonging. My inability to keep up wasn't seen as ND. It was chalked up to me being Black and not trying hard enough. I flunked out of schools again and again until I became pregnant. I gave up on school believing myself a failure, a sentiment shared by my then husband. I kind of get it. I was awful at housekeeping. Bills made me nervous, so I hid them. And despite being hired for any job I ever interviewed for, I just did not have the organizational skills to keep them. So by age 30, I was unaccomplished. And in the world of Black professionals that I traveled in, they let me know this at every turn. They let me know that it was my husband who had the degrees and I was just along for the ride. Where classism joins colorism and racism in the intersections with ND, these things are they are not often discussed. So I had buckled in for failure in my life. I just strapped failure in and said, this is where I am. And I threw all of my energies into raising my child and community organizing. Now, looking back, I can see that I was actually gifted and I really was undeterred. My child didn't care that I was clumsy, and he never let me forget to feed or change him. Communities that needed someone to identify environmental justice, housing justice, any kind of injustice, they didn't seem to care that I was directionally challenged or I forgot to pay my water bill. We were just all in community. Through this work, I built social currency and self confidence, a concept that Terrayoso connects to community cultural wealth, skills, knowledge, and context possessed by communities of color, often overlooked or undervalued in educational settings, privileging Eurocentric standards. Eventually, I have built enough social currencies to tell my self confidence it was time to try school again. Motherhood and community organizing became my springboard, an unconventional form of secret intelligence that I had built. I used that as I returned to college again. In this new digital era that I was in college, my advocacy skills became self advocacy skills. I requested escorts around the campus. I set reminders for everything and was an early adopter of using books online. Yet, as Bailey and Mobley argue in Work in the Intersections, the very structures of higher education often magnify the compounded marginalization of Black women with disabilities. My strategies, escorts, reminders, digital tools were survival skills in a system never designed with me in mind. Still, I graduated, undergraduate, got my master's, and began to teach first in other countries, then online. But here enters the intersection of class and assisted technologies. In 2012, when I received my master's, we know that intersectionality and marginalization shaped who was using assistive tech and how. My privilege as a Black woman in this case is what alienated me from other Blacks in a Black serving institution. Sabina Anama's work in Discrit notes that traditional affinity groups often reproduce exclusion when faced with intersectional experiences, leaving some members feeling doubly isolated, in my case, exponentially isolated. Where I saw this most was in doctoral pursuit. There, I faced glaring reminders of this early colorism that I talked about through the microaggressions that were happening in my graduate school for a doctoral degree. If I had simply stopped with my MSW, I would have felt like I beat the system, that I had won out over systemic interlocking otherness. But I wanted a doctoral degree because I wanted to teach at the university level. But the successes that I had in undergrad and social work school were not going to be repeated for my doctoral degree. It would be a mistake to explain my struggles solely by race. When someone is not like us, people qualify differences. Oh, she's Black, but she's Gen Z like me. Or he has ADHD, but he's Italian like me. But in my case, a Black woman with ND over 50, not one of my identities could compensate for all the rest. There is something to be said about the way that we respond to age. And in the same way that race is disabilitized, so is age. More so, because we are closer to reality of our true frailties as we age. I was longing to belong, Yet without intersectional affinity groups, especially in doctoral pursuits, I was alone and isolated. Recent discussion on Black women in HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions, confirmed the complex navigation through anti-Blackness in these HSIs as well as PWIs. Crenshaw, Kimberly, states that the intersectional experiences are greater than the sum of racism and sexism. Capturing how compounded burdens affect Black women with ND and accounting for the exponential otherness when age is factored in. I felt like I had entered a weird twilight zone. I really should have fit in somewhere. I was an accomplished professional woman of color. I had strong capital in other Hispanic Latino communities. But on the border, in this in betweenness between two countries, I found myself again misunderstood, mischaracterized, and alone. Although I was a very youthful 55 when I started the program, I was still much older than the others in my cohort. I realize now that at 42 when I started my undergrad degree, and even at 49 when I started my master's, I probably still looked very young, and youth is its own beauty and its own currency. Complicating my age and being the only Black student in my online program, not from that area, was my ND. I had learned to cope before, but in an online program, it was different. And my ND showed up in these odd ways, like auditory processing online, cognitive processing of thoughts before answering, and the inability to quickly negotiate the geography of my keyboard while thinking complex thoughts made me not look stupid. It made me look old and feeble. Age combined with my other identities left me as a super misfit, longing to belong. So, all my identities, Black, neurodivergent, older, female, converge into a longing for belonging, not satisfied by single identity groups. Rituals of rejection and longing are constructed and sustained by the politics of distinction that frame not just curriculum, but our place in society at every age. Yoso reminds us the hopes, dreams, and cultural strengths we carry, our aspirational and familial capital, are not deficits. My indeed is not a deficit. My Black skin is not a deficit, but powerful sources of resilience and resistance, even when the world refuses to see their value. Thank you for listening.
That was fantastic. We need your voices akin to yours so badly because this has been kind of not a completely missing piece, but definitely something we want to develop in KC, and that was just so beautiful. I'll start
You
off the.
know, when I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, when I developed it, it was like 40 minutes when I read. I don't know why it went so quickly this time. I'm sorry.
Well, we have a strange relationship with time in this group, so who knows where that extra
Yeah,
20
yeah.
minutes went, right?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
we were talking about yesterday in our lovely conversation about stages of grief once you find your identity later in life in terms of neurodivergence. And I can't even imagine the compounding nature of grief when you have these other intersectionalities. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it really is true. In in grief, I am not unfamiliar with working with grief, but I had not necessarily considered it until I started doing this. And I hadn't actively considered it. I have spent time um when I went back to school, and it was so much easier to do it 20 years later. because I had a smartphone and because sorry, I had done the work that I had done in community organizing was a lot of advocacy and a lot of resource building for other people. So I took all of that with me when I went back to school to get my undergrad degree for the last time. I don't know what I'm choking on, but when I went back on campus, and it was, I will not say it was so easy, but it was so much easier. I began to think at that point, oh man, what if, wow, what if I had had these tools earlier? And it's not just tools, you know what I mean? It's the way time has progressed and we understand things differently. So it's not even just tools. It's the way that we address colorism today. I'm living in a time that has progressed in so many ways. We still have so much work to do, but you, like during the 70s, there was this Black Power movement, and it was very much, with the afros and natural hair, but not all Black people embraced that. Many older Black people did not embrace that. And so the hair that grows out of our head, just the way it is, we were going every week to go get that relaxed, to go get that. And when we think of it being relaxed, we think of it of making it acceptable for white society. So it's like we have to look like something that is going to be acceptable. And so it's like all of those things together. You hit on it. It's not just like, oh, I have these tools and I can carry my homework on my mobile, or I can carry my books or anything like that. I can set reminders, but it's all of the other things together. And there is a loss and there is a mourning and there is like a what if. Particularly with the doctoral degree, because I entered that so much later anyway, and it took so much longer than what I thought. And it was like, I have to redeem the time. And I'm constantly, like, I have to redeem the time. How do I redeem the time? How do I do all the things that I know I can do now that I couldn't do before? How do I squeeze those into the 70 years that I have left? How do I get those in? So there is a profound time of mourning.
Yes, I've never really framed it that way, about making up for lost time, but I think a lot of us in the lost generations experience that when we finally get our feet underneath us. Uh, it's a real drive. So again, I'll tell people if you want to say something, wave in the frame or put up your hand, and there's an icon button on the bottom right. And it's also okay, periods of silence. We have people here that process slowly, and we want to hear from everyone who has something to say. So we don't get nervous about that here. But with that,
No.
yeah, yeah, I'll turn it over to the mob and see what people have.
So while the mob is thinking, I'm going to say something if it's okay. So I did not, I referenced in the title of being the OG, and that is the African American old girl. In Black community, we will often say man, that's the original gangster. And I will say that I look at myself as kind of like this original gangster because I feel like there are so many firsts that I have participated in that are not written in any books anywhere. I feel like, like, even at the university where I got my doctoral degree, I was the first Black person that many people in that program ever had a conversation with. Or I was, when I taught in China, I was the first Black person that many of those students had ever seen. Or in various programs, like I was the first. And so, like, I had to be so gangster about the way that I entered spaces because, I'm carrying all of these identities, and yet I still have to do a certain amount of masking and molding to whatever community I'm in. I still have to conform to language of where I am. One good example of that for me was being in Costa Rica, where the term negrita is something that is a sign of affection, a term of affection. But for me, with my pre-civil rights ears, I did not hear negrita. I heard the N word. And and so my responses to those things also in my body, because I respond so much in my body to so many things, was, like, how am I going to travel in these spaces, and I don't even just mean geographical spaces, but in all of these social spaces, carrying the way I process things, the way things come in my head cognitively, and still make it through. Um, because always, I don't always think I'm going to make it through. I may enter situations. Um, this for as an example, until I talked to Don yesterday, like I was like, oh my goodness, I just don't know that I'm going to be able to do this. There's always kind of this doubt, am I going to be able to make it through? And I think that for me, as a Black person of a certain age within D, I rely heavily on, even though I am not in this space right now, like the mechanisms that were given to us in the 60s and 70s, those songs, those gospel songs, which have been so enriching. And music itself is something that has helped me as a person with ND. And it has just really helped me be the original girl, the original gangster, that OG. Ah, can you read that for me, please, Doc?
Sure, I can read that.
Thank you.
No problem. Um, how did you discover your neurodivergence? And when you first heard about it, was it an instant acceptance of that being the identity you were missing, or did it take time for you to accept it as part of you?
Who wrote that? Because you're going to make me cry. Who wrote that?
I believe it's
Thank you so much for asking that question. Um, I always felt that something was wrong with me. I could not understand me. And this is at a very young age. I mean, I didn't learn how to tie my shoes until I say at 9 I was reading all of these books, and at 9 I couldn't tie my shoes, but I really didn't learn how to tie my shoes until I was in high school. Like, I really didn't. And I'm not sure I completely ever learned how to tell time, and I'm not kidding, but because of the digital clocks and stuff, I really didn't have to. So that was one thing that I really didn't have to do. But it was, there were little things that I looked at when I was a little girl. Like, I could not understand how other people could get a, like, navigate space was one of those things. Navigating space, like my friends would, somebody would say, yeah, to go to the store, you do da 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 da, and then they would do it. But I would always get lost, and I'm in this little town, and my mother, I I come home and my mother, because we don't have cell phones. I come home and my mother's like, Miss Pickett saw you like 4 blocks away. You just had to go down the street. What was the problem? And so, like it was really through like a lot of shame that, you know, I knew that there was something wrong. I didn't know what was wrong, but I identified it as something wrong with me. And this was only exacerbated when I went into school, just these different things, just like I could do one set of things and I couldn't do other things. And I just did not understand. I couldn't I wish you all could just see what my backpack looked like when I was in high school. There were crumpled papers everywhere. The homework would go in as neat sheets of paper and it would come out like it had been through a tsunami. I mean, it was I still can't explain how that would happen. And so it was finally, just through years of just labeling myself a failure that I had a bout of depression and I went to a psychiatrist and she said, I want to ask you a series of questions. And she asked me a series of questions and she said, I'm not saying that you don't have depression. What I am saying to you is that the way that you have been forced to overload your systems and cope with the world is really a heavy burden on you. And then she diagnosed me with ADHD. And so it's been later, within maybe the last year or so, that I have self-diagnosed myself with autism. I did not get a formal diagnosis for that, and let me tell you why. Because I can't. Because anytime I've gone to the doctor, they're like, "What do you need? You got ADHD. What's going to be different? What do you need to have a formal diagnosis?" So anyway, thank you again for that question. And if you have a follow-up question, please let me know.
There was another one, I think someone wanted read out loud, if you can grab that, Roger.
Sure. Thank you for your presentation. I can connect a lot of what you said with narratives in, quote, Autistic in Black, unquote, by Kayla Allen. I can relate with always being in liminal in-between spaces because of intersectional factors like neurodivergence, race, gender, etc. How did you deal with that feeling of liminality?
Are you a Gloria Anzaldúa fan? I can't see it on my phone. So Gloria Anzaldúa is a writer who is from the border of the school in the area that I went to. And when I read her books, I saw myself really, in a different way in these liminal spaces. In it kind of gave voice to how I was putting my identities together, even more so than intersectionality. I love theories of intersectionality, but the liminal spaces really explained more of how I was feeling, being everything and or everywhere and nowhere all at the same time, belonging to all these groups and yet none of these groups completely. And so I think when I was able to identify it, it was a lift. It really was. It was like I can give a name to what I have. And just like the advocacy that I had done for the teen moms that I work with, and really just like identifying were there challenges, whether it was being unhoused or whether it was language or whatever it was, and then just addressing that. I was able to do that same thing for myself. So once it was identified, I began to read and learn more about it because like I'm like, I have what? And you have to think, like I was diagnosed in 2004. And even though that's not like 1990s or whatever, 1980s, it's still when I told people that I had ADHD, they would say, but you're an adult, or they would say, but you're a woman. And so I had this, a name, and I could and I could see it clearly. Like we're going down the list and we're checking off everything like, yep, 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 yep. And then I go into support groups, and there are all of these other people, and they're telling my story. They are singing my song. And yet they're all white. And so it wasn't until COVID that I actually met another Black woman who said the words out loud that I have ADHD or ND or anything like that.
Great. And the answer to the question you had about whether that was they were a fan of the author is yes.
Yes, yes.
And I think someone wrote something, but I'm not sure if they wanted it read out loud.
I
Sometimes
can read
people
it out
can do it.
loud. It seems like it's a question that was intended for the group here or for Chloe. Thank you so much for sharing some of your experiences with us. It is really appreciated. Um, Sorry, I have two questions. One, looking back, is there anything you wish someone had asked you when you were younger? Something that would have helped support you in the best way? And two, what needs to change in our world so that you and other Black neurodivergent women don't feel like you have to mask who you truly are?
Wow. Thank you for that question. Um, Looking back, man, if I had a magic wand and I could go back in time and I could change anything, it would be to have um, probably the curriculum of otherness that I have kind of created in my mother's in for my mother, who was also a teacher, because my mother would have been my greatest ally and my greatest champion. And because I I failed her, or for me, it felt like that, in as much as she appreciated those parts of me that were so, you know, manifesting intelligence. Um, she was also so disappointed that I could not string things together. And I am the least accomplished in my family. And so that was very much a disappointment that I would be the one that is the least accomplished. So I would have my mother to know more because she would, given the information that I have, she would have championed me and she would have been a global advocate for this. And what needs to change? I think kind of what I said earlier, and um, I just looking back to see if I could find it to really understand that it really all of the marching that we did, for civil rights, all of those things really don't mean anything. And like all of the policies that we could change, it really doesn't mean anything. We need to be able to have these this acceptance and intergenerational conversations in all of our spaces, in our digital spaces, in our our face-to-face spaces, and to be able to not have other people identify what is wrong with us, but to have us identify in these spaces everything that is right with us. Oh wow. Who el- I it only flashes on my phone for a second, but
Sure.
I know
Let
there are
me
some other things, but yes.
let me grab that. Uh, what you have recounted as your experience is almost identical to my experience. I was in a doctoral program more than 20 years ago and stopped out of various reasons. I have only embarked on doctoral studies again to create space for neurodivergent students. So my research is currently on neurodivergent students, educational accessibility, belonging, and student success. As a ND Black person in a woman's body, I still feel a sense of isolation despite long work fostering community for others in all spaces I find myself. Are you leading a support group?
I am not leading a support group. Boy, did I want to have a support group though when I was, I only finished my doctoral degree. I finished in I defended in November of last year and I walked in May. And up until the time that I put the gown on to walk, I wanted a support group because I felt so isolated. I mean, and my dissertation was actually, it was called Other on the Border, and it talked about the exponential otherness and that using a lot of what Hurtado wrote about in campus climate and belongingness, and bringing it all together for my multiple identities, and so I am not, but boy, do I, like, reach out to me. Like, I really encourage this because I wanted that so much. Yes, please.
If I could jump in, for some time, we've wanted a, a BIPOC support group in Casey, and people are busy and things come up or whatever. But that's still on the wish list, and how some of us envisioned it, including the people that would participate, was that they would have their own support group without eyes on them or any expectations. And then eventually they could bring back to the whole group the things that they did want to share of their own choosing to make us better. Um, and you guys probably don't know that Chloe is actually in my town. We are actually friends in the flesh, as it were. And I know her to be an amazing person, and I've asked her to be on our steering committee. So as much as time will allow, I'd love to see her involved. And on the point of being in this town, I know with my own eyeballs how much work you do, Chloe, the events you put on and the people you, oh my God, it is phenomenal. So thank you for that. I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, again, I love that question, and I don't have enough words to say how much I would have wanted a support group. So anyway, yes.
All right, looks like we have another question. Um, you said something about pathologizing or disable disabilitizing ND. Many neurotypicals don't or can't understand our struggles as neurodivergents. And it's common to hear them say something like, quote, everyone struggles with the same things. Their struggles are not so unique. With the right strategies or tools, anyone with or without ND can succeed, unquote. Uh, what does it feel like they're telling us that our ND shouldn't be an issue at all. What do you think? Are they correct? Thank you.
Boy, you saw me jump out of that chair. I can't tell you the amount of times that that I've heard that like before the diagnosis, it was you just need to apply yourself. You're just, don't be so lazy or, all of these different things. And then once with the diagnosis, it was exactly that. Like, is there a script that typicals have somewhere that I didn't get? Because they all say the same thing. I mean, it's just like, um, man, I think what is being said to me is that it is not understood that I am not the problem, that I am living in a world that is trying to make me uh, conform to something I should not have to conform to. In all of my identities, I should not have to, unless I want to, I should not have to do anything to my hair, my skin, my mind, my behavior, or anything to conform to what dominant system says I should conform to. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I'm done with, yeah.
Great. I actually have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Uh, I would. I'm very curious. How being or having multiple sort of minority type of identities, how that sort of affects your journey in neurodivergence. Um, like for instance, if we're hearing that a lot of folks, they feel like they may not fit in a certain way, or there's a sense of like, not belonging. And then they're trying to figure out what is it that um, is sort of preventing that connection. And if you're a minority, then you think, well, is it because of this minority identity or is it because of that minority? And so if you have multiple minority identities, then, do you have to like systematically exclude them, in order to say, oh, well, maybe I'm autistic. It's like almost like a conclusion of you gotta exclude all this stuff before you can conclude it. And I can see that really delaying, people's sense of finding themselves. And I wondered if in your situation, how that played out.
It You are describing a long checklist that I have carried through life. As a younger person, I just felt odd. I just felt like, um, like my body is too big, and that's why I keep knocking things down. And I was not overweight, but I was field hand sturdy. I was massive in the sense that I was muscular and thick. I was very thick. And and so I was just like, maybe if I were smaller, then maybe I would fit in, or and again, like not knock these things down, or and really just kind of going through this checklist every time, especially when going to a new situation, like every single time. And I wrote about that, with in my dissertation, about like not knowing which was the most offending identity. Like I simply didn't know how I was offending people. Like I didn't know, and because if you know, you can change, right? Because you want to belong. And so it's like, which thing is it? What do I need to go about changing? Until I was like, no, I'm just not going to change anything. And that acceptance, I won't call it acceptance. It was just like I had resigned myself to the fact that there really was nothing that I could not change any of the identities. And so I had to just say within myself, you are who you are, and this is what you have to go through. So I think I've spent my entire life with that checklist of trying to figure out which one of my identities is offending people and not allowing me to belong.
If this is too personal, don't feel obligated to answer.
Oh,
But a
ooh, I
lot of
already.
us, you're already all about it. A lot of us who are autistic or neurodivergent, neuroholographic, as we discussed, we feel a great sense of connection to our ancestors. And it's something primal that's I won't say it erases the lines of race, but it's so primal that it seems to be including those recent ancestors and going back to those root ancestors that we all share. Does that play in your life?
It really does. It's so my mom, she joined the ancestors a couple of years ago. And I feel like I have a much better relationship with her now than I ever had before. So like that it's so interesting that you would ask that question. Um and and so one of the things that I do in town is kind of like this movement journey, and I do a lot of things through movement, and then I invite people to explore various parts of themselves through movement. And so I do a lot of ancestor work. I do a lot of work with libations and visions and dreams and like, like our root ancestors, and saying that we are all folk people. I am African American, and more with the demographics changing in the United States, I say I am foundational Black American, giving space to people who have are building roots here from other places and contributing so much to my knowledge. I learned so much from my Afro, Latino, and Hispanic um, brothers and sisters, because they did not, I don't want to generalize, but in many cases, they did not have the same limitations that religion imposed on us Black Americans here in the United States. And so just being able to have that influence in my life has really helped me. And it eases when I can enter into those vessels, into those spaces. It eases the burden of ND, for that. It is measurable how it does that for me.
Thank you. We're coming up on the hour. I want to make sure, okay, we've got somebody else. Go ahead.
Great. Let me read this one here. It says, you said earlier about the importance of other NDs, identifying us as opposed to NTs. It reminded me of a paper on ADHD/other ND scholars I read last year that talked about the importance of, quote, being named by people who move like us, unquote. You mentioned not meeting other Black woman NDs until the pandemic. What's the importance of interacting with people whose brains/experiences are like ours and who share other intersecting identities with us?
Fabulous question. Because of the things that I do, my world has been mostly on Black, not Black, in for much of my life. Again, when I was writing this, I couldn't believe that I was including myself in someone who was part of integrating school systems here in the United States. But it's a reality. Like I look at the Little Rock Nine as somebody who did that, not me, but it is a reality, and that has kind of set the trajectory of my life. And so for much of my life, um, it has been difficult to find people who might be able to understand some of those layered burdens. Just thinking about even just being away at a predominantly white institution and all that carries, and then adding ND to it. And so finding this group was just amazing because it is if it was finding people who spoke my language, even though we were speaking the king's English or the queen's English. It was finding people who like spoke it like I spoke it, and with the shortcuts and the code switching and the way, I mean, just these things that I felt like I would only uniquely see in this group of Black women. And it validated me, it healed my heart, it gave me a place where I could drop in and say, XYZ is happening, y'all. What do you think? And then I get all of these, girl, you know what you need to do, or oh, honey, this happened to me too. But really giving it to me in language in ways that are just so meaningful to me. It knits my soul together even to think about what those spaces mean for me.
Great. And there's a comment to be read out loud. Hi, Chloe. When listening to your poem and hearing your talk, I found myself truly back in my body. This is a deeply powerful and joyful experience for me. These days, I often feel like I'm not really, quote, in, unquote, my body, as if shame and ableism is preventing me from feeling as if I am there in myself. These days, it's very often a struggle for me to, quote, find my way back in, unquote. Your voice and presence have helped me feel like myself, to feel truly that I'm not a failure. Thank you. It was a very joyful moment for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those words.
And of course, anyone else who we'll have a little moment of silence if anybody wants to catch up and ask something. Okay, well, I will say that we often continue our conversations on our Facebook page for the group. People can talk about ideas freely. Want to give us a quick plug for that page. We only have a handful of moderators, and we have almost 1,800 people now. And over the last many years, we have only, as I mentioned before, had to ask like 4 or 5 people to maybe find somewhere else that they fit better. And that's phenomenal. And it leads me to know that autistic people are actually socially gifted. So I would love for us to have a post about what you talked about and start some of these dialogues, because I think that they will really be meaningful for people, and people won't be afraid to really ask and really answer with the truth. And that's what we need, right?
It really is.
And just one last question for me. How can Casey specifically make sure that all of these voices are counted? How do we invite people? I've invited many people and I don't think they trust me, and that's completely understandable. So how can we get around that?
I thank you. I just want to thank all of you who have commented. It means so much to me, and so I really appreciate the comments that you've made. And I think that continuing to have people from different spaces and just even broadening what that means. I feel like our world is still so very black and white. That's still how we think of it, but just thinking of other people who are sitting in intersections with ND and um, asking, for those people to come. And it may not be a format like this. It may be, like a time where they're just playing their music, or a time like it might be something very different, and just being open to what it what that means for each individual person to represent.
So find their special interest or their where their heart shines and focus on that. I think that's a great
Yeah,
idea. Thank you. One more chance. Anybody want to jump in? Well, I don't know if you're seeing it, Chloe, but we've had so many. Thank you so much. We were so glad to listen to your heart, and people are just really warm for your presence here today. I love to see that. Um, so yeah, we'll work on the Facebook conversation and certainly have you back, and we'll talk about the steering committee and what an amazing representative you would be, my friend.
thank you.
You're so welcome. Okay, we'll see each other soon, all of us, and check the events button on the Facebook page for many fascinating things that are coming up over the next month. It's we keep outdoing ourselves, so look for those opportunities. And until then, I will say goodbye, and goodbye, Chloe.